I'd said, if you look at the beginning of the Parsha, although Hashem had said to Avram that he should leave his homeland, his birthplace, and his family, nevertheless, Lot, his nephew, had come with him. So Pasuk Daled, if you take a look at Pasuk Daled towards the beginning of the Parsha, it says, Vayelech Avram kasher dibir elov Hashem, Vayelech ito Lot. And Lot went with him, okay? Avram went as Hashem had spoken to him, Vayelech ito Lot. And Lot went with him. In Pasuk Aleph Perek Yud Gimel, Vayal Avram Mitzrayim Hu B'Ishto. This is after Paro had realized that Sarah is Avram's wife, and he'd given him tremendous wealth. So they left Egypt, and Paro told him, instructed to leave Egypt. It's not a place for a person like you. Vayal Avram Mitzrayim Hu B'Ishto. Avram had ascended from Egypt, he and his wife, v'chol ashelo, and all that he had, all the wealth, v'lot imo hanegba, and Lot with him to the south. So I had pointed out that when Lot went with Avram, the Torah says, vayelech ito Lot. Ito, it means with him. When he left Egypt, the Torah tells us, this Perek Yud Gimel Pasuk Aleph, v'chol ashelo v'lot imo hanegba. When he went down to Egypt, when he left Choron to go to the land, it says Lot went ito. When he ascended from Egypt with tremendous wealth, together with Avram, which ultimately led to the dispute between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot, it says he ascended with him. Imo doesn't use the same word. Both words mean the same thing. Imo, ito. So I explained that the word ito, the root of the word is es. Es, what does es mean? Es has no translation. Es means whatever it's associated with, it's an adjunct to whatever it's associated with. For instance, the ultimate example is es Hashem Elokecha Tira. You should revere Hashem. The Torah could say Hashem Elokecha Tira. What's the es Hashem Elokecha Tira? What does the es come to include? So Rebbe Kiva says, es l'rabos tamid chachamim. That just as Hashem wants you to revere Him, He wants you to revere the Talmidei Chachamim who was secondary to Him. That's the adjunct. Es is the adjunct to Hashem. L'rabos tamid chachamim. So the word adjunct is always secondary. Whenever you speak about two levels, the lesser level is S versus the primary level. Imo, it means with, but it means they're peers. They're on the same level, equals. It's not secondary, an adjunct, but rather the equivalent. When Lot went to Egypt, left Choron to go to Canaan, Lot was his nephew. He was an underling. And Avram, through his compassion and his commitment to his nephew, he took him with him. So Lot came as a secondary person. Now Lot comes back from Egypt, comes back wealthy, tremendously wealthy, and therefore he has a mind of his own. Because of this new gained wealth and this new sense of power, now he feels he's the equivalent of Avram, or at least he's on a peer level. And if he's on a peer level, he's not subordinated to Avram, and he has a right to assume his own beliefs, his own position, his own perspectives. As a result of that, when they came back to Canaan and there wasn't enough grazing land for both of their flocks and herds, Lot did his own thing. And when Avram told him, "You're doing the wrong thing," what did Avram say to him? "We cannot coexist. If you go to the right, I go to the left. And if you go to the left, I go to the right, but I'm always here for you. And the Torah tells us when they parted, Pasuk Yud, Perik Yud Gim Pasuk Yud, Vayisa Lotus Einov, when Avram offered him this new approach, if I go to the left, you go to the left, right, we're breaking up, we're separating. He lifted his eyes and he saw the whole region of the Jordan Valley before God, Hashem destroyed Sodom. Vayivchalot eis kol kikar hayarden, vayisalot bi Kedem. And Lot traveled from Kedem. What does Kedem mean? Kedem either means the east or Kedem means from the origin. So Rashi over there says, he left Kadmon Shalom. When he left to go to Sodom, he says, I'm out of here. I have no interest, not in Avram, and I have no interest in his God. That's Vayisa Lot mi Kedem. He traveled from Kedem, mi Kadmon Shalom. Where did all this emanate from? When Lot was subordinated to Avram, this never entered his mind. It was never a consideration to entertain anything but what Avram represents. Avram said, this is acceptable, it was acceptable. If it was unacceptable, it was unacceptable. Now that Lot has his own newfound wealth and he's able to maintain himself and he feels he can be independent, now he sees himself as an equal to his uncle. And therefore, his uncle is not going to dictate his life. And the first opportunity he has now, he leaves, he travels, Mikedem. I am not interested in Avram, I'm not interested in his God. And I always say, we find, we had the Gemara in Yuma, the Gemara says, after 120 years, when a person comes to be judged, and there are going to be a number of questions they ask a person. Every Jew is going to be asked this question. Kavatitim la Torah. Did you study Torah? So if a person is a poor man, he will say, was I able to study Torah? I barely had sufficient to feed my family. I was occupied earning a living, eking out a living. So they say to this person, were you poorer than Hillel Hazoken? Hillel, when he was a young man, he was a Babylonian. And to be able to listen to the lecture of Shmai Vavtalion, who were the leading Torah sages of the generation, you had to pay a fee to get into the Beis Medrash. And Hillel was a woodcutter. Every day he would cut two, it's less than a penny, two tropics of wood. One coin he would give to his wife or the family, which was the bare minimum. And the other coin, he would pay the entrance fee to go to the Beis Medrash. And one day, he was only able to earn one coin. So he gave the coin to his wife, and he wanted to hear the lecture. So what did he do? He went on the roof, and he's put his ear to the skylight, and he listened to the shiur. And what happened? He was so immersed in the shiur, it snowed, and he was, the next morning when Ashmai Vavtalion came to say the lecture, although it was a sunny day out, the next day, it seemed to be the Beis Medrash was overcast. They look up to the ceiling and they see a human form on the roof. They run up. There was about 6 feet of snow piled on top of him, and it was Shabbos, and they removed the snow and they kindled a fire because he was suffering from hypothermia. He was conscious, and they brought him back. So they say, were you poorer than Hillel? And he was able to work out and somehow fit Torah into his schedule, as poor as he was, meaning that if you value anything, even though you may not have that much time, but you could have some time. So why didn't you study Torah? That's going to be the claim against the poor man, if he comes up with this reason. So I asked the question, Hillel, every day he would go out, cut wood for these 2 small coins. He would do this day in and day out. Why didn't he, on Sunday, he should have cut enough wood for a whole week, And therefore, every day beyond that point, his wife has sufficient to feed the family, and he studies uninterrupted every day, goes straight to the Beis Medrash, and he has the means for the entry fee. Why did he every day cut the minimum? One coin to his wife, 1 coin to the entrance fee. Have enough for a week, and you're fully undistracted for the rest of the week. You don't have to be busy cutting wood every day. Why did Hill do that? So we explained that the human being, the human mind, together with the Yetzer Hara, is very interesting. The Yetzer Hara is always whispering in our ears. I'll give you an example. Somebody goes and says to John Doe, why don't you buy yourself a Rolls Royce? He says, a Rolls Royce? He said, I barely could afford to put food on the table. It will never enter into his mind under any circumstance. He has no relevance to a Rolls Royce. What about buying a home? He says, I live under rent control. Can't afford a home. All of a sudden he meets somebody and he has a newfound job and he's earning more money. And all of a sudden he thinks he can afford to put down a down payment to purchase a home. He was okay living in this rent-controlled apartment. But now all of a sudden he says, I think I can afford that home. As he inches his way up the pay scale, he says, something? The car I have doesn't even have a garage, have a driveway. I think I could afford a house with a one-car garage. His horizons are expanding because now all of a sudden he can afford more. And before you turn around, 20 years later, he has a 4-car garage. Because as he has more money, his horizons keep expanding. Because that's the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer, even whispers in the air, you can afford more. At your position, where you are, do you live this way? You can afford more. So the more you have the capability to do, all of a sudden it's a new level of challenge. At one time it wasn't a challenge. Do I buy a house? I can't afford to put food on the table. It's not even a consideration. And therefore I had time for many things. But now, because I have the ability, all of a sudden I have new distractions in my life. And therefore we read in Pirkei Avos, Mar b'nechosim, mar b'daiga. The more you have, the more headache you have, the more distraction you have in your life. Hillel understood, as great as he was, he has 2 coins. He has no choice. He needs one for his wife, one for the entrance fee. Let's say he would accumulate enough money on Sunday to cover the week. And all of a sudden, something comes into his head on Monday, which is more than those 2 coins. Something he would have never considered to entertain, all of a sudden he could entertain it. Hillel understood that. Therefore, he says, something, I'm not going there. I'm going to keep it at the minimum, that it's not a consideration, and my only reality is 1 coin for my wife, 1 coin for the Beis Medrash entry fee. Lot, when he went to Egypt, he was this orphan, Avram's nephew, who Avram, through his compassion and mercy, took him under his wing. Although Hashem said, separate, he couldn't push him away. He was waiting for the moment where they could separate. And the moment came. But initially, when Lot had nothing, he goes with Avram. He's Ito. He's subordinated to Avram. He's an adjunct. He would never consider ever disagreeing with his uncle. His uncle's perspective is his perspective. When he leaves Egypt with all this wealth, he comes back as Emo. He's independent. I go toe-to-toe with my uncle. Therefore, I'm not subordinated to his perspective. Even before he would have never considered that he was subordinated, there wasn't any other consideration. Now, his shepherds are challenging the shepherds of Lot, of Avram's. It's justified. Don't tell me how to live my life. So when Avram suggests separate, he's out of there in a moment. And where does he go? He goes to Sodom, to the location where this is the most evil location on earth. You think after being under the influence and the tutelage of such a holy man, your uncle, is that where you go? You go to Sodom? The answer is many times we ourselves, we suppress many things we don't realize. But the moment the opportunities present themselves or the challenges, all of a sudden we have new ideas, new fangled ideas that we never ever believed we even would consider, and now we're considering it. Ever. Therefore, it's an alert for us to keep things at a minimum, because once you go above the minimum and you call it, I think I can afford it, and you have that extra, if it becomes extra, you never know what that could touch, way it could touch you, and as a result of that, there are considerations that you never considered originally. And the model of this example is Lot and Avram Avinu. Initially it was Ito. Once he became Emo, he became this evil man. And not only how evil did he become, even after he was taken captive and Avram saved his life, where did he go to? You'd say a person learns a lesson. He went back to Sodom. And ultimately, everything was destroyed. All his wealth with Sodom. He and his daughters leave Sodom. That's the only thing he comes out of. And that was the merit of Avram Avinu. What does it take for a person to learn his lesson? And in the cave, when he has relations with his daughters, it says over there, Rashi cites Chazal, that a man who craves for this kind of relationship, for sexual relationships, and this level of indulgence, ultimately, they can defeat him of his own flesh. Those are the words of Chazal. And that's why ultimately he committed incest, although he was intoxicated. Initially, he didn't realize the first daughter, but Rashi cites over there, dots on one of the words, you make a mistake, you were intoxicated. But learn your lesson, because you see what it can bring to. He wasn't concerned. And it happened again with the second daughter.